Today we are going over another Notion video, and this time it is all about how to make your Notion aesthetic, as the cool kids say. I know sometimes it can feel a little frivolous to spend what little free time you do have on adding custom GIFs to your to-do list, and you might be asking yourself if this is just a subtle form of productive procrastination. But there are actually a few principles of psychology that do in fact support this behavior. Number one, when we feel like we have ownership over something, we are more likely to engage with it. So if you're around during the early 2000s and used MySpace or Neopets or AIM, then you'll know how powerful customization can be within our digital spaces. And number two, working in spaces that inspire us actually does increase motivation. If this wasn't true, companies like Google wouldn't have spent stupid amounts of money on nap pods and giant Lego sets or dressing adults in weird pinwheel hats when they could have just checked everyone in a gray sterile office instead. Also, if you have ADHD or are just suffering from an advanced case of chronically online brain rot, then maybe you do need some animated stickers and pretty banners to make you want to do anything more than just doom scrolling in bed, and that's okay. Now, I could just info dump a bunch of tips, but I don't think that's the most helpful thing to do here. Instead, I like to think of Notion as a game that has levels to it. So some of you are level 1, some of you are level 100, in which case you should probably be teaching me instead. But this video is going to be structured roughly by not only progressive difficulty, but also impact. So if at any point you feel bored, feel free to skip ahead in the timestamps, and if you feel overwhelmed, slow down, go back to the previous level and watch it again. And first up is level 1, simplify and declutter. So for the purpose of today's demo, I did put together just kind of a dummy dashboard that we can work with. If you've just gotten started with Notion, then you're probably gonna have something like this. Maybe you've tried a bunch of different templates already, maybe you've made some customizations, but generally this is kind of the basic information people start with. We have our title up here, maybe like a little intro text, a quote, some pages, and then down here are just different databases like tasks, projects, journal, habits, resources. We're gonna go through and edit all of this, make it look a lot nicer. It's a little chaotic right now. So some of the first things we wanna do, go and turn off backlinks, because right now you can see a little indicator that we have 2 other pages linking to this, which is not very helpful. So if we turn that off, there, already looks a lot cleaner. And another trick I like to do, especially if you want to keep a lot of information on the same page, then you can use something called a toggle. So if we click /, this automatically brings up our block selector. You can also just activate that by pressing plus. And if we go down here, you can see that there is a toggle list. So this will just be regular text, or you can go down, toggle heading. And I think we're going to use a heading, probably use an H1. And I'm going to call this tasks. Get rid of this. And now we can pull this up into here. And see, now it disappears from view. And all we have to do is open this, and we can see it whenever we want, and we can close it when we're not using it. And just for a shortcut, I'm going to type the /H1, and we can see the toggle heading shortcut there. Projects. And then I'm going to Command D to do another one and another. This is going to be journal, habits, and resources. And then we can go ahead and drag these in. Okay, still looks pretty simple, but at least there's not a crop ton of information in our face right when we land on this page. And now there's a couple tips about cleaning up databases that I want to go over. So if we open up tasks, for example, you can still see the database here. The first thing I almost always do without fail is to hide this title here. And the reason I like doing that is just to save the vertical space, and also it's going to give us a lot more control over how we want our titles to look, which we'll go into that into a later section. But right now we just got rid of that so we don't have a bunch of, duplicating tasks and then tasks again. Something else I really suggest you do is to create different views. So right now we have, the default table that shows all of the tasks in the database. And I've created another tab here that is in progress, and we can hide this as well. And this is filtered by only tasks that are in progress. And then if we go, we can create other views here. Go to done. This is also filtered by complete. And let's say this dashboard, I just want a snapshot of the most critical things I need to worry about at any given time. So I might choose to put the in progress tab first, and whenever I open this, that's going to be what I see immediately. And this way, again, not overwhelmed with a bunch of information, but it's still here if we want to see the rest of our tasks. And another great thing about using different views is now I can actually go ahead and get rid of anything that I don't think is useful here. So I might not need to see the created time, maybe that's just for reference later. And if you right click, you're going to be able to go to hide in view. And maybe I don't want the notes either, so hide in view. And now you can see this cleans up the table a little bit, so we're not looking at 20, 30 different properties at the same time if that information is not important to us. But you can still see them if you go into other views, and if you were to click on this, those properties are still visible. If you find yourself having a lot of different views in the same database, and you'll notice as you start to add more, this goes into a drop down, which is an extra click, and we don't really like that. So sometimes I will actually go to rename, just put a space here, and use an icon that tells you what this is about. So this is in progress. Let's do these little arrows. And now that tab has been shortened quite a bit because we're not actually using text anymore. We just have an icon instead. And we can also change this one and say, space again. Choose maybe this check mark. And you can continue to do this with any tabs that you want to minimize and shorten, or of course you can still keep text there if you'd rather do that instead. And the icons within these properties are also customizable as well. So you can click in here and you can actually change the name. So let's say task, because that's more direct, and then maybe I want to have this. So now we're customizing each of these properties here. And status, I don't really like this weird circle thing, so maybe I will put like a little checkbox there instead. And priority, let's do an exclamation. As a personal preference, I'm not really a big fan of keeping all these different emojis for different pages. There's just too much visually going on. I think it can be fine for, like a icon on the page, but within a database, I don't like it. So just as a personal preference, you can drag all these if you have different ones right now. Click edit icons. And I like using their native icons for databases. So let's say these are projects, and you could change it to a star if you wanted, or just anything else. And the one thing that's really nice if you use their native icons as well is you can go into here, click new template, and let's say my projects again are personal, work, someday. So instead of creating like a full template, I'm just gonna create an icon that I want to use for this. My personal ones have like a little smiley face, and then I'm gonna go and create another template, and this one will be, let's see, get like a briefcase, and then that is work. So now this is a nice little hack where if you want to create a new task, so let's say this one here, I want it to have the same personal icon. All I have to do is click here and it changes it automatically for me. And if I went into my work presentation, I know that I want to use this icon. It just saves you a little bit of time from having to search for it. And I'll go and change these to the personal just real quick. So now it's looking a little more streamlined, but we still get some information from those icons if there's different types of info within the database. And obviously if you were going to use a different icon or a different emoji for every single entry, you wouldn't be able to use this. Now what happens if you don't want to use icons? Because you don't have to, but if you go into, let's say, my resources database right now, you can see that some of these don't have an icon. If I wrote something in here, it's going to give me this weird little empty page that I kind of hate looking at, and things start to get kind of chaotic. Let's say I didn't want to have an icon for resources at all, and I also don't want to have this sort of weird alignment issue happening. You can actually go up to options and layout, and you can turn off show page icon. So this is a way to keep things really clean if you don't need any sort of visual representation. I would just turn that off. And I want to show you guys two more tricks before we move on. Number one, again, I don't like having a ton of information dumped at me all the time. So one thing I do like to do is to go up here and choose a load limit. So we could say 10 pages. And this way we can see a preview of all of the information that we want in this view. But if we want to see more, all you have to do is click load more. But otherwise it's truncated whenever we first land on a page. So the other thing I want to show you real quick is that if you see this status property here, so the type is status, this can actually show as two different ways. So right now we have it as a selector, so you're seeing not started and progress done, but you can change it to checkbox. And when you do that, now you're seeing a check indicator of what the status is, which is pretty cool because now I can actually have other views where I see all the status progresses if that's important to me, and I can create new views where I only see the checkboxes. This is just a nice way to be able to check off tasks without having to go and do this drop down and change the progress. And there's a lot of database tricks I'm going to go into later on. These are just kind of the initial ones that'll help things look a little bit cleaner. Now for level 2, we're going to add some spice to our page and start making it look a little more personalized. So when it comes to customizing, there's a couple options that are built into Notion already. So if we go up to here, you can see there's different ways to customize the page. And number 1, you can create a full width, which is really common in a lot of general dashboard OS templates, because this way you can start to create different sections of the page and really customize it. Again, get to all that later, but for now we're going to make it a full page so we have a little more flexibility. And then there's also these text options up here. We can create serif or mono, if you want to have kind of like a night lo-fi engineering vibe, or if you're a writer and want things to be more like literary, I don't really know. But I generally keep it as default, but those are other options if you want to go in that direction. Now when it comes to headers, this is not customizable. The only thing you can do is, again, go back up to here for the page and say small text. That'll make it smaller, but it's also going to make the rest of the text on the page smaller as well. So other than that, you can't really do much with this. There are some built-in header options. So if I were to click onto here, say turn into heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. These are just different sizes. So for example, if I say heading 2, you see that gets a little bigger. And there are some little tricks that you can do to make this feel a little nicer. For example, maybe I just want to do this all lowercase. My dashboard. Make it feel like a little more friendly. You can also add some spaces between here. And now you see there's like a little more airiness to the page. One trick I did see someone do that I thought was really cool was to add a little divider here. And what happens is, let's say I did that on this page. And I change this icon to like a star. So now it just looks kind of nice because you're dividing the icon from the text itself. If that's to your taste, that's an option. And a couple other ways you can do this too. I want to call this my pages. So I could turn this into a quote. That's one way to make it into kind of like a heading. And you can actually go here and change the size to like larger or smaller. One other thing that I also like doing is to turn this into a call out. And we can change the colors here to, any sort of background you want, or you can also go and change the text itself to a different color, and then you get this nice little border. So this is a way to kind of divide your sections with a heading that's not just, the built-in headings if you want. You can also duplicate this, put this down here, and then say my databases. Add a space here. And again, just some ways to kind of section off the page a little bit. And I think I'm gonna make this maybe blue for now. Now, one big feature that's gonna unlock a lot of flexibility and creativity is to add columns. And going back to the whole reason behind why we made this page much wider is because if we go up here and say add, and we type in column, you now have this option to create 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. I think you can actually create unlimited columns. But let's say we created 3. And now you can see these blocks are divided into 3 sections. So if I pull this up here, now this is suddenly shortened and it's only in that column. And I can also pull and drag over these items, put this under here, And now we have kind of like a little navigation bar, right? Maybe I want to keep this down here under my databases, but maybe I want these to be next to each other. So I can make those two columns, pull this into here, pull this into here, and now I get to see them side by side. So let's go ahead and hide this, make that look a little nicer. And then I think I'll keep my habits. I can maybe pull them up here so I can see them pretty easily. And I don't think I need to hide these, so I'm going to turn this back into just a non-toggle. Hide this, rename this to habits, maybe give it, a different icon there, and now we can see this up here. Maybe I also want to have my journal up here that I can see. Also, I think the search for the Notion icons is horrible. I don't know who put the keywords for this, but if anyone has a better idea of how to search for icons here, please let me know in the comments. Now I'm gonna hide this, and we can already see it's starting to shape up, get a little bit of structure. We have, my navigation over here, my habits and journal, and then my tasks and projects next to each other, and at the bottom is resources. So making progress. Now, once you've started making columns and kind of adding some structure, there are different ways you can do the navigation, and I really highly suggest you create your own, because if you look over here on the side, this is pretty chaotic. There's not a lot of flexibility with how Notion lets you work the sidebar. So what I prefer to do is click on these two arrows up here, just hide it, get rid of it, I don't need it, and get rid of this thing here. And instead, I'm gonna make my own custom navigation. And there's a couple ways you can do this. So right now we just have the list of pages, but we can also go and make our own custom links. So let's say I wanted, my work is gonna be called something other than work. So work dashboard, but for some reason I just want this page to still be called work. Well, what you could do is write this out, highlight it, and you can go to link, and I press on that work page, and now go straight to that work dashboard. So if you want to have any sort of like custom written links, this is a really nice hack for that. Also the option of adding buttons, which if you want this to look more like a website, that could be something that's fun to add. So we're going to do /, type in button. And buttons are essentially just like an automation. So you're designing your own sequence of actions that are going to happen every time you click on this button. You can give it a name. This is work dashboard again, and you can give it an icon. Go back with the briefcase, maybe do purple. So every time the button is clicked, the action we want to happen is to open page. This is going to open in a full page, and that's going to give us the whole kind of like website hyperlinking experience. Click done. And now when I go and click on this, it brings me directly to that dashboard. So that's another way of creating your own type of navigation. And maybe, something is more important here, so you want to kind of like call it out. Another thing you can do is use these buttons to create really quick actions. So if I created another button, and let's say I want an easy way to make a new task for today. I go in here and click the check mark. So I'm going to say add a page to my task database that I just created. Add another property. I want the due date to be today, and status is not started. And then one other step I want to add is to make sure the page that I just created is going to be opened. So let's say I want it to be open in a side peek. Now when I click done, if I were to click on this button, new task for today, we can see a new page has been added to that database. So record video, set a priority, close this. And if I go down to tasks, you can see that record video was just added. So So lots of cool shortcuts you can add, and that's a really great part of your navigation. If there's quick notes, quick tasks, anything that you want easy access to in terms of actions, definitely suggest putting that in your navigation. I'm gonna add some emojis for this real quick, make it look a little nicer. Okay, so now we have the beginning of our navigation. What happens if I want the same navigation on all my other pages, right? I don't want to have to go through and recreate this every single time. Go to synced block, and now I'm just gonna go and highlight all of these, grab the handle, drag it down into the synced block, delete this extra space, and you see this red outline here that's showing up when I hover. That means that this block that I just created is going to be the same in every page I paste it into, and if I make changes in the new pages, then that's going to sync back to all the other ones. So I'll show you what I mean. I can take this, say copy block, and if I go into work, I press Command V and I say paste and sync, now you see this has shown up here. And if I were to change this, let's say I wanted to add like an underline, and I go back to my dashboard, you can see that's also been updated there. So we can go through and add this to all our different pages, and then now we have a navigation. However we design it, it's going to be the same on every single page. And one thing I also like to do is if you add, let's say, a title here. Now that we're in columns, if you were to add a divider, you can see if the divider gets shortened within the column instead of being directly across. So you can also use this as sort of like headings if you want to. You can have like text and then the divider under it, and it kind of helps shape the page a little bit more. So that's another option. I'm gonna go and do this on here as well. Journal. Hold this, duplicate, and pull this here too. Now this is pretty black and white. We have a couple colors from, you know, the call out so far and emojis. And if I wanted to add some color to this, there is an option if you click on a block to change the color. So let's say this was, you know, yellow. It's going to make this entire area yellow, which, you know, maybe we want, or maybe we just want this section highlighted. So for example, maybe I just want habits to have a background and not the rest of that section. If you highlight the text itself and then go over here, then it's going to limit it to just that heading. So let's do that here as well. And this also gives you the option to change the text within the highlight, because see, if you go here and say you're going to change the color, it changes the whole thing. But if I just highlight the text, and let's say I want this to be like a softer brown, now you can combine that blocking highlighting color with the actual color of the text, which is also really nice. Now going back to the call out, there's a lot of ways you can actually use this creatively. So let's say I made another call out here. This emoji, if you don't like it, all you have to do is add a transparent icon. So it's just going to be 280 by 280 image. And now it's been uploaded, but you don't see anything. All you're going to see is the type something. And if you don't want this here either, you can't press space because Notion force feeds AI down your throat every 3 seconds. So instead, you know, type something, put a space here, and then delete this. And now I've actually just created an empty color block. So this can be used in a lot of ways. You know, if you wanted to create your own super thick border or sectioning, change the color to something else if I wanted. Again, lots of ways you can make creative use out of this if you want. Another neat trick I actually like using these callouts for is to hold my databases. So if you drag a database into here, you can see now there's this nice little color block for it. I actually prefer going to color, and then if you click default, now you actually get like these outlines, and so you still have like a very nice light white space, or you know, black if you're using dark mode. It doesn't have to be just like a bunch of colored blocks everywhere, but there's still a little bit of division here, so you don't just have everything floating. The only downside to this is that you can't get rid of the title areas, so even if you wrote nothing, there's still going to be like this big space here. So usually I actually just put the title here, and get rid of this. Probably get rid of the divider for now, just keep it a little lighter, and then maybe I'll add back the icon. So say this guy running, and let's do the same with this one over here. I'll pull this up here, delete these, add a nice little title. An icon. And if you're gonna go this direction, this is actually a really good opportunity to go back to what we talked about before and get rid of the title here. So that way it's not saying like habits and then habits again. And the final trick I like using callouts for is, let's say if we created one here, and maybe we'll add a fourth column. I just dragged that up, created the column automatically. I can change the color. Maybe I want to do like a yellow. And if I change the icon to a pin, let's say this is like my daily notes, and then I'm going to do Shift Enter to go down. And then I keep going down here. You can see it starts to look kind of like an actual sticky note, which is really cute. So that's also something you could experiment with. Quote blocks kind of do the same thing here. So if I called a quote, went to like the customization section, you can see that if you choose a color, this creates a background for it as well. You can see if we press that Shift Enter again, we can create another space, only now we have this little line here, and we're also not restricted on having to, create this separate title for it. So depending on your use cases, this might be better. I don't use these as much. Not really sure why, I probably should. And then the last thing I'll say about these is you can actually use quotes as dividers as well. So if we do just kind of like a plain quote here, and again, Shift Enter, we're gonna see that line come down even though there's no text here. And if I want to drag this maybe in this section, I can kind of bring the columns closer together, and then maybe do this, pull this over, and then maybe bring this down. This adds kind of like a nice little divider between my navigation and the rest of the information I have on the top here. Now moving on to level 3, where we're gonna upgrade our databases even more. So a couple basic tips here. First is number 1, you can actually use a relative date for database entries. So if I went and deleted this and replaced it with, I'm using the @ symbol here, and then click on today. And this title changes as the days go on. So once tomorrow comes, this is gonna say at yesterday, and then it'll say, like at 3 days ago, at last week, depending on what the context is. And then eventually it'll turn into May 20th, 2024, May 21st. So if you have something like habits or a daily journal and you wanna have kind of a more like colloquial title term for it. And then the second thing that's kind of a neat little trick is you can actually add emojis to text in tags. If you have something like a mood tracker here in your journal, I have like a little emoji pad on my computer. Let's see, happy, we can add that. Stressed, what would optimistic be? Let's see, maybe that'll work. And then let's add one for anxious. So now when you're choosing the different moods, you can see that there's actually an emoji to go with it, which is really nice. And some other ideas for this is you could do this for like priority tags. There's actually these like red circles that emojis use. So there's this one here, and type in yellow and we'll see this. And also remember when we were talking about how you can change the status from like a checkbox to a dropdown, something else you can also do that might be a little bit more fun than just checking this off is there's an option to create buttons within your databases. So if you scroll down, you see this new button tag, click on that. These work very similar to how we showed in like the navigation earlier where you could create your own buttons. The only thing is it's activating within a database instead of inside a general page. This button property, we'll just keep it a button, and the name for it is going to be done. Again, we can also go with the emoji here too if we want. And you'll just say add action and go to status, set status to done. So now whichever page you're clicking this button on, it's going to set that status as done. If I were to go back to the in progress tasks, I can show this property here, drag it up so I see it closer to the status. And now if I click done, you see that went away and now it shows up on here. Now let's talk about tables specifically, which is what everything is in right now. These can look kind of messy by default because you have, all of the information. It's like in this grid system, and when you add new properties, they're all showing. So there's a couple of things we can do to make this look a little cleaner. Seen me do this already, but you can rearrange properties anywhere you want. You can also go into view options and properties and rearrange them from here. You can hide them. So for example, if I didn't need to see the status or the priority, I can hide these here. And you can also right click on the property, say hide in view, different ways to do it. But again, if you're being very thoughtful about what you're showing, it's not going to be as overwhelming. You can also go up into layout, and there's a couple options here. So we already turned off the database titles earlier, but there's also an option to show vertical lines. And if you take this off, now you don't see these dividers here. I typically keep them on, but if you want just like a little less visual stimulation, then you can turn them off if you want. One other thing that I find is really helpful, let's go down to resources here, is this is a wrap all columns option. So you can see right now, because this column is kind of small and I have like a bunch of tags here, they'll wrap around to the bottom. That's what wrapping is. Or if you have a title that's like too long. I don't really like this unless I need to see all the information, because the vertical spacing starts to get very inconsistent and it just doesn't look as sleek as I would want it to. So if you go in here and you turn this off, you can see that now everything is just one line. So if you use Excel, very similar to that, turn off the vertical lines as well and turn off the database titles. So you can see this is already looking a little bit cleaner. And if there's, like a database view that has a lot of different categories. So for example, this one we see, books, videos, articles, different types of resources. You can also arrange this visually by going back into options, click on group, and I'm gonna say group by the type. The same database, but instead of having, just one long list, we can see all the articles in one section, all the books in one section, all the podcasts. You get the point. Typically, if I do this, I like to actually hide the property of whatever I'm grouping by, because it's kind of redundant at that point, and now we can, have a little bit less information there. My projects, maybe I wanted to group it by the type so that I can see my personal, my wish list projects and my work all in different sections. So that's if you want to keep everything in a table view. There are other views that you might be familiar with already that we're going to go through and kind of show some hacks for as well. So right now this is in a table layout, but what if I decided that I wanted all of my tasks to show in a board? So if you're familiar with Kanban boards, very similar. This is really nice for any sort of status. So if you have, tasks, projects, and you want to move them from like not started all the way through done, it's very satisfying to be able to just drag this into, the done pile, or maybe I'm in the progress of something and I drag it into progress. And one way to make this look a little bit nicer, depending on your taste, is you can go back into layout and you have an option to color the columns. This is actually something I didn't discover until recently, but it's kind of nice to have everything sectioned off depending on like the color of the status tag you've chosen. And you can also customize how these cards appear by going back into layout, and then you see there's a card preview as well as a card size. So if I want this to be a little bit smaller, save some space, I can do that. I can also make them really big. If there was a page cover here, this would also show. And then another option I like sometimes, I don't use it that often, but it's the list view. List views are not that useful, I think, but sometimes, for just like a list of notes or a list of simple tasks, it can be fine. The one thing I don't like about them though is if you keep them really wide, all of the properties that you have showing show up over here, which I don't find is very useful. So I would suggest if you're using a list, you keep it in a column like this so that it brings those closer to whatever the title is. I don't really like having these show up here, so I'm gonna go like we showed earlier and get rid of the page icon. You can also select which properties you want to show here. So if I go into the property section, you see name and type currently showing. Maybe I would rather show mood instead, so I'm going to put that here, get rid of this, and now you can see all my journal entries. The mood will show up automatically. Now the calendar view is also pretty popular. I would say it's the one I see the most after table or gallery, and let's say I wanted to make one with my tasks to see when they were due. So if you click on that, it automatically creates a calendar for you. I'm gonna go ahead and hide this title. You can also open it in Notion Calendar, but that doesn't exist inside the Notion app for some reason that we're not gonna get into. But you can see right now, all of these tasks have been arranged by due date, and you actually have the option to change that if you want. So let's say I had like a start date and a due date. I can organize it by created time, any date, really. And then another option I take advantage of a lot is changing this from month to week. Unless I really need to see everything that's happening in a month, it's kind of nice to have it weekly, especially if it's just keeping on top of whatever like events or projects you have. And it also saves vertical space, which is always really nice. In the calendar view, just like all the other views, you do have the option of what properties you want to show. So you can put, the created time. Don't know why you'd want to see that, but you could. Status, all of these, and get kind of like a snapshot. The only thing you want to be careful of is that if a property is not filled, it's still going to give that space. It's just going to be empty. So let's say, for example, this didn't have a note, right? Get rid of this. You can still see that empty space is there. And if I didn't have a priority, now it's a really big empty space. So you can imagine this kind of gets really wonky looking at times. Gallery views don't do this, which is why sometimes I use gallery views for like a journal or something that isn't necessarily attached to a specific date on a calendar view. If you have a property that's not always going to show up, I would probably suggest not showing it in the calendar view. Noob, the calendar looks awful. You don't have to be so rude. I mean, sure, the calendar features are one of the weaker points of Notion, but I'm trying my best here, okay? Yeah, but that doesn't make it good. Well, what's the alternative, huh? Well, I use a little something called Okiflow, who also happens to be sponsoring today's video. Okay, that's cute and everything, but the whole reason I got into Notion in the first place is to keep all my information in one app so I don't have to duplicate everything in multiple places. No. See, you can actually sync your Notion with Okiflow so that it's all done automatically. Huh? Really? Yeah, their integrations are actually one of their biggest selling points. You can connect Notion, Google Calendar, Gmail, Slack, Outlook, pretty much any app that you're currently using for task management, emails, or events. So you know how you're always late to meetings because all of your work projects and personal projects are spread across different calendars and you can never keep track of when your appointments are? Well, by syncing everything with Okiflow, you're able to see all of your tasks from each of these apps in one place alongside all of your events. And any changes you make here, like altering due dates, checking off tasks when completed, adding events, that information all automatically syncs back to the original apps like Notion. And if you want to make changes on the Notion side or another app like adding new tasks, those changes are imported automatically as well. Oh wait, that's pretty sick. Yeah, and they're not just an organizational hub either. They actually have some pretty unique features, one of which is time blocking, and I think that's something you could really benefit from given your poor history of time management. Listen, I think you have the wrong person. They actually treat time blocks as different events in your calendar because they are, and you can actually drag your tasks directly into the block that you're planning on completing them in. You'll see a nice progress update, and if you have any left over that you didn't get to, it's super easy to just drag them into the next day or back into your task list to worry about later. You can also drag tasks directly into the calendar as well, and this way you're getting a full overview of not just the tasks and events that you've already committed yourself to, but you can also easily create flexible plans around those prior commitments. So if you're a really visual person who needs to see like a physical representation of time in order to truly understand how much you can get done in a day, then this helps a ton. Okay, you convinced me, but I would really love to try this out first before I commit to anything. Totally understandable. You can actually use my link in the description to get a free trial and test it out for yourself. No strings attached. That's actually pretty generous. Thank you. I'll take a look. Is that my shirt? Did you go through my closet again? Okay, where were we? Calendars, right? Let's go to gallery. Gallery views share a lot of the same features as boards and some of the features of calendars. The only difference is it's not going to be organized under some sort of grouping, and it's also not going to be organized on a calendar. But you do have the option, just like boards, to go into the layout, and you can choose how you want the page content to look like, what you want the page preview to be, and you can also choose the card size as well. Right now, there's nothing in here. This is a blank page, which is why you're seeing it be blank. But if I were to click on this and let's say, there's a cover here, and then I go back, go to layout, and I want this to be page cover. Now you see that. If I wanted to show the contents, if I write something here, you're gonna see the content. So this is kind of nice if you have a note-taking system and you wanna be able to see a preview of the notes, or if you were to add an image here, and you got rid of this text, you can see now this shows up. But if you wanted to have your cards have some sort of like preview image, maybe these are links to different pages, and I think you've seen people with dashboards that look like that. You can either choose to add it to the top here, or you can add it here. Just make sure the settings again in layout are correct, whether it's the page content or the page cover. But for now, we're just gonna keep it simple and say none. And now you can see it's just different boxes holding the title of the page, and there's a quick option to add new here. You can actually get pretty creative with this. A lot of the stuff you see that's really advanced in people's templates come from gallery views, believe it or not. One thing that is kind of cool is you can actually create like a navigation from here. A new gallery view. And I want this to be navigation. It's going to be home, personal, work, habits. Now if I go to layout, make sure this is small, get rid of the preview there, and we create a column that I drag this into. If I pull this even further, now you're going to see it's just one stack of all of these entries. And this is actually a really common alternative to creating custom navigation. I can bring this up here, and if I wanted to, I could get rid of this, and this could be my navigation instead. So depending on if you like more of that text view, you like the buttons, you like the custom links, tons of options to create your own navigation. And then the other thing that I really like about this is that the properties, if you show them, say we showed all, these don't leave spaces like in calendar view. You are seeing some spaces here just because there's more information here that's pulling the row down. But if I went back to layout and let's say the card size was large, you can see these are a little more even than what you would see in a calendar. So if you wanted to create, well, let's do this with habits. So I want this to be like a gallery view, and get rid of this. If I pulled this down here, now you have those cards, kind of like if it was a calendar. Again, not fully the same way, but a lot of people like using this for habit cards, because what you can do is go into here, go to properties, and then if I were to show all of these, you can see they show up. So if I pulled this back into this section here, I could also filter this to only show today's date. Let's add a property for date, and say the date is the 22nd, and filter date is this day. This shows up, and this will automatically show the new card that's scheduled for the date every day you come into your dashboard. And I can just go ahead and check these off really easily without having to click into this and do it directly here. And probably my favorite part to use galleries for is as a bulletin board, which I'll go into a little bit later because it requires some like complex formulas, but just keep that in mind. We'll circle back to this. So one last thing before we move on from databases is I want to show you some customization you can do within database pages themselves. These are a little bit different from a regular page. So for example, my dashboard, This is a page, but you can't see any properties on top of here because there are none. But if you go back, because this is a page within a database, you see all of the properties listed. I always like to go once again and turn off those comments so that we don't see them. And sometimes when you start to build really complex databases, you're gonna have like 30, 40, 50 properties, and it would suck to have to scroll through all of those vertically to get to the actual text on the page. Depending on what the most important ones are, or the ones that you wanna be reminded to add, right click on this and say property visibility and hide. Or what you can also do is say property visibility, hide when empty. So now if this didn't have a property in it, so let's say I cleared it, it's not gonna show. But if it does have one, it does show automatically. And you can always click on this to see all of the properties that you've hidden. Now there's a few other customizations you can do here if you're familiar with relations. So let's say we added a relation to tasks. And now we see this here. If you right click, you're gonna see a show as option. Relations are automatically showed as properties, but you have a choice to show it as a page section or as minimal. So let's say I added some of these to here. I mean, these have nothing to do with making coffee, but suspend disbelief for now. And I go back and right click and say show as page section. You can see this shows on its own beneath the rest of the properties. So if there's something really important or you want it called out on its own and it doesn't have too many relations connected to it, you can use this. I wouldn't really suggest it if you're gonna use this for projects and you probably have 20 tasks, then that's gonna be a lot listed out because there's no way to truncate this. And in that case, I would probably actually go back to show as and click minimal instead. So now this shows all of them if you were to open up that link. So depending on your use cases, there's a lot of ways to kind of arrange these things so that your database pages look clean and they're a little more useful to you. And the last thing I want to mention is you actually can move these around depending on what's useful to you. So maybe you want to see the status first. And then also keep in mind that however you change these icons, so let's say we change this to this little box and we change this title, it says like project status. This is universal in terms of the icon and the title on it, no matter what the view is. So if we go back to projects, you can see now project status, that's been changed, the icon's been changed. So there's no way to customize the icons or the titles of a property based on like the view or the page. They're all gonna be the same universally. Okay, now that you know a little bit of the basics of what Notion has to offer, we're gonna get really, really personal here by adding custom graphics and widgets. So number one, you've probably already seen me changing all these icons, and we do have emojis and then these native icons that Notion gives you, but you also have the option to upload a custom icon. So if you want something very specific, you can use resources like Pinterest, Pixabay, Flaticon, FreePic. All of them have icons that you can, Pinterest, be careful, obviously don't steal from people, but the other ones are completely free to use. So I'm gonna add this cute little weird cat ghost thing. The only thing you want to make sure of is that the background is transparent if you plan on using any sort of banner behind it, or if you go from like light mode to dark mode, because this way, if I were to go into my settings, so if I were to change it to dark mode, there's no stark white background behind it. And then you can also click here to add cover. You can do this on any regular page, you can do on a database page. They'll give you one automatically, but if you go up to change cover, they have some colors here and some very generic images, if you ask me, that you can use. And then there's an option to upload directly, or you can add an image link, so you don't even have to download it if you don't want to. And there's also Unsplash, so you can search colors, objects, anything here. These are all free to use, but if you have something you want to use instead, you can always choose to upload that as well. And I do get a lot of questions about where I get my banners from. I would say Pinterest is not a good place because people don't really upload high resolution images there. These, I believe, have to be at least 1500 pixels wide, which is pretty large. Some tips are, number one, you can go to Google image search. When you go to images, if you click on tools, you can say size large. And this will only give you results that are really big and probably big enough to use. You can just right click, go to copy image address if you don't want to have to download it. We go to change cover, we do link, paste it in there, submit, and now you can see it shows up and it's pretty clear. So I'm gonna make it more of like the grass here. And you can reposition this here and click save position. But I would say probably the biggest way to customize is by using inline images. Add an image to replace this. All you're doing is going back to that block selector. I'm gonna type in image, and you get similar options to what you have in the banner. There's also an option for Jiffy, so that's kind of nice that they have this automatically in there. You can also do, again, unsplash, embed a link, upload your own. And this is just a really good way not only to add some personality, but also to play with the structure of the page. So I encourage you to get creative here. It doesn't just have to be like a traditional photo. So if we go to Pinterest and we go to my Notion library, I have a couple different pictures here. So you could use something with transparent background. This guy's kind of cute. So click on it, copy image address, you go back and then embed link. And this is how you kind of get like that sticker effect versus just like a photo. And maybe I want to make it like a little bit smaller. So if you want to use like a custom GIF that's not necessarily from Jiffy, you can also get that off of Pinterest, off of Google. Again, go to copy image address, go back here. You can do Command V and paste, and it'll automatically ask you if you want to embed the image. So you say embed image. And then when you embed it, it's animated, the GIF is already active. And again, you can think outside the box in terms of the size or shape of these. If you were to take a banner, like a wide banner, and I like to do this for maybe like a footer separating different sections of the page. If you pull it outside of, all the other toggles and everything, you can expand it all the way to the edge. So it's like a full bleed image. And then now it kind of looks like a footer or an end to the page. You can also use this to maybe section off something. So let's say I put it here. And now this is kind of the general snapshot dashboard, and I can scroll beneath here. Maybe get rid of this title and see the rest of everything beneath it. So again, lots of really great ways you can get creative here. Now, moving on to widgets. I know a lot of people really like these. I don't personally use them or find them very useful, but more power to you if you like them. If you go to Indify.co, they're kind of one of the most known widget producers. And a couple of their really popular ones, Google Calendar, they have weather reports. They also have a life progress bar, your life ending by the minute, which is f***ing terrifying. I don't know why anyone would want to know when they're gonna die. You want that, then you have the option to. So you can kind of dig around here, see if there's anything that you find interesting. Again, they're not gonna be the most productive addition other than maybe Google Calendar, but sometimes you just do things for fun. That's kind of what the whole video is about. And then there's actually native integrated embeds that you can use within Notion that function kind of similar to widgets. Type in embed here. You can embed, a Google Doc, Google Map, PDFs. You can also do Spotify. So if you click on the share link from a Spotify playlist and you paste it into here and say embed link, you actually get a nice little preview of that. You can play the music directly from here. So if it's like a workspace, study space, maybe that's something that you want to add as well. Get rid of the notes. I'm gonna pull this under here. And if you really want to get carried away with additional features, Notion does have a public API that a lot of developers create extra kind of like apps or features for. And just what that means is you can go to websites, like for example, this is called Chartbase, and it will take your database and actually create charts for you, just like it would in Excel. And you can put these directly into your Notion account as well. Most of the time when there's an API or like external app that people are creating, you're probably gonna have to pay for it. You can do like a two-way sync with Google Calendar. That costs, I think, $5 or $6 a month. So it's up to you if you think it's worth it, but there's a ton of different ways that you can customize your Notion and kind of like add to it and get around some of the limitations if you find them frustrating. And the fifth and final level is to use formulas. And I know everyone is intimidated by formulas if you don't use them. I was for a long time as well, but I'm gonna tell you my number one tip for learning them, and probably my number one tip for Notion overall that has completely changed my life. Are you ready? Yeah, you can ask ChatGPT to write formulas for you. So all you have to say is, help me write a Notion formula that shows the day of the date property in text. And then it spits it out for you, and you can literally copy this and you put it directly into whatever database you're trying to add a formula to. I want to add a new property. formula, edit, and I add this. Now, date is not actually a property within this database. Delete that, and I'm gonna say start date. This is taking the start date and telling me what day this is happening on. So May 18th is a Saturday, April 4th is a Thursday. Plenty of ways you can use formulas. I mean, this really opens up all of the customization features in Notion and all of the crazy fancy things you see. ChatGPT has been such a hero in helping me learn about them. I still don't know that much, but you don't have to. Instead of having to spend hours and weeks and months figuring it out, if there's any issues, so let's say, this is now not a proper formula, you can just copy this and paste it into here and say, hey, there's an error, copy that, and it'll tell you what's wrong with it, or it'll try and make it over again for you. I would suggest having like a basic understanding of coding, which I know sounds kind of intimidating. Just understanding how brackets or parentheses work, how to close different equations, understanding how Notion takes different properties and how to change them around. Take maybe a day, familiarize yourself with it. There's actually a really great resource. I'm trying to remember, I think it was Thomas Frank, but I'll put it in the description. Just understand the basics of it, because sometimes ChatGPT doesn't always do things correct, especially when you start to get really complicated with formulas. Having some understanding of it empowers you with knowledge to be able to ask it for something different or to know what's not going right, so you can give it the right information to help you write it. But it's not necessary, especially if you're just going to keep with something really simple like we just showed here. So what are some of the cool things we can do with formulas? Well, glad you asked. I'll show you this little demo database I had from the new template I'm working on. So you can see this is a gallery view. Again, going back to some of the cool things we can use galleries for. One of them is creating like this bulletin board. So you can take different information from across your workspace where, for example, this is reading my task database and letting me know if anything is due. This is telling me if I've added my daily log and how many days that's been happening. This is a collection of gold from all of the quests and tasks I've completed. So you can use a gallery view of a new database to kind of like pull in all of that and format it. And here are two examples of like really common ways that people use formulas to output on gallery views. You can add an emoji to format something. So this number, 1170, that's a roll-up from other databases, and it just shows a number itself. So if I wanted to add like an emoji or I wanted to format it, I can take that roll-up property, which is called gold, and I can say I want to format that property into text, and I add the emoji to it. So this is one way to kind of make it look a little bit nicer. And then the other thing is you can use a style property to create different colors, bold, italicize, underline. My days logged in, you see it's bold, and then the next number isn't. That's because I added the bold property and then outputted the number of days logged in. This here too, you can see this is like a color coded box. That's also, I think that's C instead of B. Anyway, again, I'll put resources down here if it's something you want to learn more about, but just kind of wanted to introduce you to some of the possibilities that you can start playing around with once you get more familiar with formulas. And then progress bars are probably one of the most popular ways to use formulas in previews. And Notion does have a built-in way to do that, but there's also way more customization you can get if you do it through formulas. And one of my favorite resources for that is actually from Ben Smith. He's really active in the Notion community. Again, we'll link that down below, but he has like this huge, let me see if I can find it. Okay, there we go. This is his public resource that he gives away for free very generously to show you different types of sliders and progress bars you can use. So you can actually duplicate this or just copy the formulas directly from here. And he breaks it down for you. He adds in, all these options like stars, circles. You can do it with like emojis. Sky's the limit. Definitely check this out if you want to get more familiar with customizing progress bars. And then the last and final resource I want to leave you with in terms of formulas is another Notion community contributor. She has put together this really cool guide on how to create colors and text properties that aren't customly built into Notion, or at least aren't really used for headings. If you want to use like any of these colors, you want to kind of use like an italicized type of font, mix the types of font faces that you have. Definitely check this out. Again, I'll leave the link, and this could give you a lot of possibilities as well. There's also some other cool stuff to click around here, like Red Gregory's color library. And the one last thing that could be really useful is custom dividers. You know those like gray dividers that are very, I mean, minimalist and fine, but you can't do much with them? You can actually use these codes to create different colors, create different widths. All you have to do is go back into Notion and paste it in, and you can see it shows up. And then I delete this, and now I have this nifty red divider. Pretty cool. Wow, that was a lot, huh? If you made it this far, congrats, you're a champ. Pat yourself on the back, and feel free to continue on procrastinating on getting actual work done by using some of the tips that we learned today. However, if you are more intelligent than I am and realize that you have more important things to do other than spend hundreds of hours learning a productivity software, then feel free to check out my Ultimate Notion dashboard, which already has a lot of this stuff set up for you. It'll save you a ton of time getting started. More importantly, make sure to sign up for Ocuflow and give them a try. Both links are going to be in the description below. Anyway, I have been sitting at this computer for way too long. Who's hungry? I am. What are you still doing here?